Text adventure games are awesome for learning Chinese, but how do they work and how can you get the most out of them? Hello and welcome to the Hacking Chinese podcast. In this week's episode, we are going to talk about text adventure games and how they can be used to learn and teach Chinese. And if you don't know what text adventure games are, that's not a problem. It's something that I've spent a lot of time on the side on a project called WordSwing, where we, among other things, have these text adventure games meant to help you learn Chinese. I have recently spent a lot of time working on a new game where you crash on a mysterious island and you're required to figure out how to survive, explore the island, and if you're lucky, also return home. It will take a while before that game is available to play, but since I've been working on it so much, I thought this was a suitable opportunity to mention these text games on the podcast. Before we get into the text games, though, I would also like to say that it is the Lunar New Year, and today is Chuxi, which is the New Year's Eve. And as is customary, I offer discounts for my courses, see links in the description, that are valid until midnight Friday this week. That's February 4th. Enough about that, let's get back to the text games. This episode is something of an experiment, and it is an experiment in two ways. First, the content here was originally written for teachers, but as is the case with almost everything else on Hacking Chinese, it generally works quite well for teachers and students. It's just that I generally address students. In this case, I address teachers, but what I'm saying is of course equally useful for students. You can just read it or listen to it as advice for how to use these text games with a teacher or other friendly native speaker. Second, I wrote this article both in Chinese and English and have therefore also recorded 2 podcast episodes. Thus, there are 2 episodes which share the same number, so there's 78A and 78B. You are currently listening to episode 78A, which is almost entirely in English. If you want to listen to or read the Chinese version, check out episode 78B instead. But if you want to stick to English, here is Text Adventure Games and How to Use Them in the Chinese Language Classroom, written by me, Ole Linge. One of the problems with Chinese reading and listening practice is that it's often too passive. The most motivated and disciplined students can force themselves to read and listen anyway, but most students won't get the amount of listening and reading practice that they need. If listening and reading practice were more fun and engaging, students would be more willing to spend more time studying and would, as a result, learn more. One solution to this problem is interactive text games. Instead of just being a recipient, the students are active participants who make choices that change the development and outcome of the story. Only by reading and understanding the Chinese in the game can students navigate the story to a successful conclusion. Since there is more than one ending, students are encouraged to replay the game and explore alternative paths, leading to natural repetition of vocabulary and grammar. Furthermore, understanding the text in the game is the only way of avoiding making bad decisions. The goal of these text adventure games is to help students improve their listening and reading ability. In this article and podcast episode, I will mostly focus on improving reading ability using these games, but it is equally beneficial to use a similar method and focus on listening ability instead, especially since the games have natively recorded audio. This episode uses the text adventure game Escape as an example. If you want to play the game, you can check out the link in the description. It is free to play and you don't even need to register an account to try it out. Apart from Escape, there are many other games on WordSwing of varying difficulty and with different themes to make sure everybody can find something they like. I suggest that teachers and students try out Escape first, but then browse through the other games to see which might be most suitable. I have written about most of these games on Hacking Chinese, so I will put links in the description. In previous articles, I have discussed learning and teaching Chinese through games in general, as well as some of the adventure text games in particular. In this episode, I will focus on playing with a teacher. This means that this episode is particularly for teachers, but also for students who might want to play text games with their teachers. Even though I came up with the idea for these text games many years ago, it took a few years before I actually tried them in a classroom. I was fairly sure that they would work well, but was actually surprised at how well they worked. In this post, I will share a discussion of how to make the most out of playing Escape with your students, or with your teacher if you are a student. Let's first introduce the game and some requirements. Escape is meant for intermediate students. As a teacher, you should be able to grasp the difficulty of the game just by playing it for a few minutes, or by looking at the word list in the written version of this episode. I estimate that the lower bound should be students that can handle HSK 2 content, and this is the old HSK 2.0, but HSK 3 is probably better. Students at a more advanced level will enjoy the game too, but playing it will be much faster, which is not necessarily a problem. Here is an overview of what I recommend doing. First, use a projector to show the game interface on a big screen, or if you do this online, just share the screen. Second, explain the premise of the story in English, basically the blurb, i.e. you're wrongfully locked up in a cell and try to escape. Third, explain how the game works briefly, in English is okay. Here's a brief summary. When the game starts, the interface will show text describing the situation, actions, and dialogue. Based on this information, students need to decide what to do next. Once a decision has been made, it cannot be unmade because there is no undo button. Choices in the game are presented in random order. There are checkpoints, so if you fail, you can start again from one of these. There are points in the game that represent progress, but you don't need to get all the points to finish the game. Fourth, students play together as a group and need to discuss what to do before making a decision. If they can't come to a unanimous decision, let them vote for different options. Fifth, the teacher can help students with language-related problems and guide them through the Chinese, but shouldn't meddle too much in their discussions or in the decision-making process. Sixth, go through the first paragraphs in the game as if they were any other unfamiliar text. Because they introduce so many new things at once, they introduce the setting and the story after all, they are considerably harder than most other passages in the game. Take your time and make sure everybody's on board before moving on. Draw images or use props if you want. Completing the whole game using some variation of the approach presented in this article and podcast episode, or to take anything from a few hours up to 10 hours, depending on the student's level, age, and how much they dwell on each scene. If they discuss each choice carefully, need lots of guidance and frequent use of the built-in dictionary, then finishing the game will take a very long time. If time in the classroom is not enough, you can tell the students to finish the game on their own as homework. If you do, make sure that they register on WordSwing, otherwise they can't keep their checkpoints and will need to start from scratch every time. In the rest of this episode, I will present the approach that I used, which is inspired by Diane Neubauer, who also wrote about her experience using Escape in her Chinese class. I've put links to her article in the description, and she also provides a video, so if you want to see what it's like, you can also check that out. Playing Escape can be broken down into two steps. First, reading and/or listening to displayed information. 2. Making choices based on said information. These two steps are then repeated as each choice leads to more information that then leads to even more choices. The game ends either when really bad choices are made or when the students successfully complete the game. When using these games to teach a group of students, the reading and listening part can be treated as any other comprehension-based activity, and your favorite approach can be used. I think the best approach is to play the game together, where the students make choices collectively. I suggest that you play the game in a web browser, zooming in enough to make the characters big and friendly, then displaying this on a projector so everyone can see clearly. Online, this is of course even easier. The teacher can then use the whiteboard to write down new vocabulary and draw pictures or a map, or outsource these tasks to the students. Here are some options to consider. Play audio first. Most students will find this very difficult, but it can be an excellent way of practicing listening ability. Listen a few times and ask students to share what they were able to pick up, reconstructing the message together. Let them listen and read the text only after you've done this. When they can't get further on their own, help them out with any gaps or answer questions. Listening first is important because while there is a lack of good reading materials, there's an even bigger gap of good listening materials. Play audio together with the text. This will probably be the default approach for most situations. Having the text on screen is a great help for people who struggle with listening, and having the audio is equally helpful for those who struggle with reading. The game underlines what words are currently being read, so it's easy to follow along and make connections between the two. Let students summarize or explain the passage. As a teacher, you have of course played the game in advance, so you know what is important and what isn't. Let the students summarize in their own words what information is contained in the passage and what it implies. Let them help each other and help them out if need be. Maintain a vocabulary list on the board. Escape contains some words that students might not be familiar with. It could be words important for playing a game like this, such as wang, zhou, or game-specific vocabulary such as 窗台 or 警卫. For a list of words like this, see the end of the written article. Be prepared to teach these. Write them on the side of the board so that you and the students can easily refer to them throughout the lesson. Draw a simple map. By design, the game does not come with a map. The idea is, of course, that the students should be able to get the information they need from the text, and that including a map is therefore, in a sense, cheating. However, to make sure that your students follow along, drawing a map as you play can be very useful. It shows where you have been, what options might be available that they haven't tried yet, and so on. A map is also great for keeping track of relative directions, left, right, and so on, which can be confusing otherwise. To engage students, ask them to draw the map. In the written article, there is also a link to user maps that students have drawn for this game and other games. Draw pictures of objects and act out situations. The game contains no pictures for the same reason it doesn't have a map. But again, drawing can help students understand what's going on. If explaining in Chinese doesn't work, drawing can make a situation clear without resorting to English. Props and acting have the same effect. The comprehension part of playing Escape is not magical by any means. Like I said, it's more or less like any reading or listening activity. After the students have understood the information presented to them, the real fun begins. Since you're playing with your students as a group, they need to make a collective decision about how to proceed. This is where communicative language learning takes place. In a small group, everybody can discuss together and present their thoughts about how to proceed. In a bigger group, you could consider dividing the students into smaller groups to discuss particularly crucial decisions in the game before reconvening. Prompt them not only to say which choice they prefer, but also why they think that's the best option. Here is what it might sound like, taken from the Chinese version of this episode.
老师说，你们觉得我们应该选哪个呢？学生甲，不要第三个。老师说，第三个是什么意思？学生甲，跳下去。老师说，跳下去为什么不好？可能这样可以逃出去。学生乙，因为我们在很高的地方，不能跳下去。老师说，你怎么知道我们在很高的地方？学生乙，我们在一个很高的房子上，跳下去很危险。老师说，那么你们觉得我们应该选哪个呢？学生乙，我觉得要选第二个。老师说，其他人呢？你们觉得我们应该选哪个？学生丙，我同意选第二个。
And so on. Not all choices are interesting in the game, but many are. For example, there are many ways to approach the other prisoner in the cell next to the one you start in, and students might disagree about how to solve the problem. Are they going to ignore him, convince him to come with them, or maybe threaten him? Let them discuss the options and decide. Your role as a teacher should only be to make sure that they understand the options. Don't meddle too much in the decision-making. If necessary, have a quick show of hands to see which option is the most popular and select that one. This kind of discussion, both between students and between teacher and student, is the most powerful part of using these games for teaching Chinese. It makes the reading and listening both before and after important and combines it with action-oriented communication. The more students are invested in the story, the more they care about convincing the others to make the choice they think is best. An important idea in task-based language teaching is that focus on form should only come after the main task has been completed. I think this approach can be effectively applied when playing text games as well. When the students play the game, you shouldn't spend too much time correcting pronunciation errors or fixing grammar mistakes. If you really want to focus on these things, do so afterwards. Since the game is quite long and will take hours to finish, I don't mean that you should wait until the whole game is finished, just that the students should be allowed to enjoy the game and use Chinese while playing it before you focus on the language itself. Once you've played for a desired amount of time, feel free to bring out any form-focused activities you like. Another useful activity that works well after playing the game is to go through the word list you created while playing the game. You will find that many of the words that recurred frequently throughout the game are no longer new to the students, and they might even remember them without being prompted. Others will have only appeared once or twice in a certain part of the game and can be ignored unless you think they are important for some other reason. Escape is completely free to play, so you can use it beyond the classroom as well. Students can sign up for their own accounts and play on their own. However, I suggest you don't tell them that until you've finished the game, or at least until you've played as much of the game as you intend to play in the classroom. You can then have them play the game on their own, exploring alternative paths and endings. There are 2 ways to win the game, for example. Getting a higher score can also be a good goal. 155 points is the maximum, but you don't need all the points to win. This will also give them ample time to use the built-in dictionary and actually study some of the language they might have missed in class. The options in this game are presented in random order to avoid students mechanically clicking through the game using a specific set of choices. You can of course also follow up with extended practice of various kinds, including writing or speaking tasks related to the story in the game. I trust that most teachers do this for other classroom activities as well, and adventure text games are no different in this regard. Finally, I would like to say a few things about resources for playing the game, and most of the resources are already included in the game itself, but the teacher can prepare certain things regarding vocabulary in advance. Diane, for example, used props for items she knew would appear in the game, such as having a plastic fork and a metal knife in the classroom, since these items appear early in the game and the students probably don't know these words. In order to make it easier for you as a teacher, or indeed as a student, I have provided a list of words that stand out as being not in HSK 2 and 3 and that are very important in the game. As usual, check the linked article in the description. So, if you're a student, good luck escaping, and if you're a teacher, good luck helping your students escape. Thank you for tuning in to the Hacking Chinese podcast. If you like this episode, please share it. More information and inspiration about learning and teaching Chinese can be found at hackingchinese.com. See you in the next episode, and until then, good luck with your studies.